Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait just another moment or two. I see a few folks signing into the room. I did want to take a moment to welcome everyone. Okay, looks like the last couple of folks were in. Welcome everyone to part 3 in the Sustainability Series, Practical Tools for Achieving Community and Political Sustainability. This webinar is presented through the Alaska region on behalf of the Administration for Native Americans. I wanted to give everyone a quick introduction to the BB Collaborate user tools before we get started. There is a telephone connection button near the top in the event you are using our audio conference line. There is another button, a little microphone with a red wheel on it. That's the audio setup wizard. Please use this to set up your headset, speakers, and microphones. At the end of our presentation today, if you'll press File and select Exit from the drop-down menu to leave the room. We have a quick response and polling, raising your hand if you wanted to ask questions. We actually aren't going to use those today, nor are we going to use the whiteboard tools that you will see alongside your participant window. We will, however, be using the chat feature, and you can type and ask your questions in here. We will answer them towards the end of the webinar today. As I mentioned earlier, this is being hosted through the Alaska Region TTA Center. Our staff is our Regional Director, Anthony Kaoli. He will be presenting later. Myself, Angela, I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Manager here. And also our Technology and E-Outreach Manager, Charles Peel. He's in the background. He was greeting you this morning. And he's here. You can chat with him privately in the event you have any sort of technical difficulties. We also have a pool of consultants with various areas of expertise to assist. The Alaska Region TTA Center, like all the other TTA centers, provides free training for project planning and development, pre-application, post-award. We also provide free technical assistance for project planning and development, pre-application development. We provide some on-site TA for grantees, TA for unfunded applicants, as well as other grantee technical assistance throughout the project implementation cycle. You can find information about the Alaska region on our anaalaska.org website. We also host several Google Plus communities for collaborating and sharing resources with other tribes and organizations both nationally and regionally. And the website for that is gplus.to/ANAalaska. And of course you can connect with the national website at acf.hhs.gov/ANA. This is a 4-part series. Part 1 was hosted by the Eastern Region, Sustainability, What It Is and Why It's Important. Part 2 was hosted by the Pacific Region, A Long, Happy Project Life Achieving Programmatic Sustainability. We're hosting Part 3 for you today, and Part 4 will be hosted by the Western Region on September 26th, How to Achieve Financial Sustainability. There are numerous other upcoming webinars, and for all of the current and past webinars from each region, you can go to the ANA, click on their Resources tab, and type in Webinars, which will bring you to this nice long website. On September 26th, as I mentioned, Part 4 to this series will be hosted by West. On October 10th, Part 1 of our next series will be hosted by West, and that will be on planning and organizing in your project implementation series. Part 2 of that series will be hosted by the Pacific region on October 24th. On November 7th, our Eastern region will host on reporting. And on November 21st, we will be hosting on continuations and grant amendments. A quick overview for today's agenda and learning objectives. We will provide you a brief overview of Parts 1 and 2. The focus will be on what is community and political sustainability, a few strategies and tools for building your community and political sustainability. We'll have a successful grantee story for you and a brief wrap-up. We hope you leave today with some useful strategies and tools to apply to your project's sustainability plan. In Part 1, the Eastern region provided several definitions of sustainability and guided us in knowing how sustainability works in practice, and that it keeps projects going long after the initial grant funds end. This is important to maintaining many of the services that are very important to our tribes and communities. They provided an overview of many forms of sustainability deliverables, from strategic plans to curriculum development to policies, procedures, and resolutions. Communication plans were highlighted, started from when you initially planned your project, continuing through to project implementation, and continuing on after the project ends. The communication is key to the community and political support development that you will need in seeking to keep your project running as your new program and creating the relationships that need to happen for the support to occur. In Part 2, hosted by the Pacific region, they gave us a great analogy of living a long and happy life, going from a project to a program, starting with keeping the end in mind and never losing sight of your goals. To keep your goals in mind and what the organization stands for and wants to accomplish, maintain a strong strategic plan and keep hopes and dreams alive. Be sure to address the project all the way through, knowing what the goals are to be accomplished, as well as knowing what is being done well, what needs to be improved. Managing your internal and external resources to the highest levels while keeping communications open and transparent for your stakeholders, leaders, community, and partners. You need to know what you want from your partners and what will make good partners for the continuation of your specific project, and knowing what success looks like for this project, not just chasing the money or empty relationships. In the end, just as in life, following the plan laid out will lead to a long and happy life with little to no regrets. So, what is community and political sustainability? Community sustainability is having community members that are well informed of the project benefits, and they then can assist you in advocating for its continuation and for further funding through the tribe, funders, leaders, and other partners. They can also introduce potential partners and funders. They are your path to political sustainability. Political sustainability can be your tribal council, your board of directors, your advisory board, state, federal, or philanthropic funders, and other leaders in your communities. Informed and interested funders want to see this project continue, and they are interested in working closely with you to fund this effort. Strong partners and leaders continue to support the project with personnel, goods, space, or funds, and can assist in bringing other partners and funding streams. Remember that your relationship building starts when you begin to develop your project, and it continues through its entire lifetime, even as it becomes long-term and sustained. Many people think sustainability not important. Well, we've all seen a plan and great projects come to a screeching halt when the initial funding is over without a successful plan, without a solid foundation from the community supporting the project, and political leaders and other organizational leaders supporting this project to maintain not only financial but interest in attending and supporting this project. And at this point, we will turn this over to Anthony Kaoli. Anthony?
Thanks, Angela. So we have a concept here that we wanted to share. It's just another way of looking at your project and sustainability and tying in the community and the political aspects of sustainability. So this is a bridge under construction, basically, and it's one of the it's a solution towards achieving sustainability, or a model for that. So the bridge, you can look at the bridge as your project, huge project. And the completed span could be your program long term. The chasm is your problem or your challenge or the obstacle that we're trying to overcome. The community is the bedrock of this project and the foundation of this project. And in this particular example, also the arch, the strong arch, can also be the community. The pillars that support this span, that support your project, can be your community organizations, your tribe, your partners. In some cases, you may have one or two pillars, and hopefully those are extremely strong, or you may have several, depending on how your project's designed. During the construction of this particular project, the suspension cables were temporary, but they can signify basically the relationship building and efforts to reach out to the different organizations and partners through different communication media to build support.
And so, in order to do all of this, you need tools, and that's what we want to talk to you about today. The numerous and several tools. These are not the only tools available, but tools that you can use to sustain your project. One of the first things we want to remind folks about is archiving. Keeping your work stored in a very safe place. There are numerous options for this. CDs and DVDs, which can also be passed out and handed out later. Print copies, and some of those print copies can even be stored in a state or national library. There's external hard drives, servers, and cloud servers. And we suggest that you archive these in a very safe place. We've all seen disasters occur within our communities, flooding, fires, and for a few dollars a month, you can archive gigabytes of project data versus spending tens of thousands of dollars to rebuild and recreate that data after such disaster. Social media. This is a part of your building your bridge, getting your community support, the transparency of the communication that has been talked about in the previous webinars. You can use Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, you can use Twitter, Scoop It for articles, and Pinterest for other information. It's all about gaining your community, bringing them together, and places that they can come together to support you and begin the process of advocating for your project. Other ways that we get the word out and keep the word out throughout our project are email and email listservs and newsletters and newspapers and posters and flyers. And there's radio and TV and PSA ads. The key is knowing which of these is the most effective in your community. Is it just having meetings with your community and having focus groups, or having food at the community meetings? Is it putting flyers in newspapers and post offices and local stores? Or is it radio and TV, depending on how everyone in your community communicates best? And don't forget your social media for bringing them together in a single place. When you're thinking of all this communication, who are your stakeholders? Think of your recent projects. Who were the stakeholders that you brought together, and who maybe was missing from the table? Think both about the internal and external stakeholders that are so important to your project. Community leaders, the auntie who holds a strong voice, the non, the chief, the local store owner who gave you some of your supplies. The list goes on and on. The key is, again, remembering that the communication and the relationship building with these stakeholders is so important. It is one of the strongest keys that you will have to going from your community support, knowing what your community members want, what is important to them, and bringing them together to advocate for the extra political support for the funding and the supplies and the needed continuation of these valuable projects and services. Anthony?
Okay, thanks. So another tool that we're going to profile in a little more depth today is focus groups. And the purpose of this is to provide you one tool that can help to engage stakeholders in your community and build that grassroots support. And that support is done through communication. Focus groups are just one way of fostering that communication. A focus group is a small group of people and our project stakeholders who are asked about their perceptions, their opinions, their beliefs, and priorities towards an issue or a service or a concept or a project or an idea. So the example that I'm going to profile today is from the community of Makoriak on Nunivak Island in southwest Alaska, out in the Bering Sea. Now, this is a community that I worked with in the past, and I was involved in their strategic and community planning. Communities in Alaska have a lot of different entities, a lot of different players, even though the population is small. So that makes Alaskan communities somewhat unique. One of the challenges in approaching community development is building those relationships, especially when you have multiple entities. And sometimes you have the same players or same tribal members that are sitting on multiple boards across multiple entities. Even though they're from the same community, you have to focus on building relationships, and working towards a common vision. So that's what we set out to do in the CORIAC, and one of the tools that we did use was focus groups. What we were trying to do was to provide a mechanism for the community to do their own planning, basically, rather than having someone come out and present a draft plan, which has happened in the past in some of our communities. The idea here was to engage everybody and have them share what their priorities were. So this was one of the tools we used. In this case, we had several different planning dimensions for each of these focus groups that were set up, and the focus groups were organized over the course of a week. They covered different areas of community development, culture and tradition, health and human services, and so on. So we had one focus group for each of these dimensions. And what we did was we made up these focus groups. We basically put them together with different community stakeholders, with typically an elder would be involved in each of the focus groups, and the lead, the facilitator for each focus group was someone from the community, either a program director, a tribal subject matter expert, or a department head. And basically the only role that the external consultant performed in this case was to provide some training to those community members on how to conduct the focus groups. So a manual was put together, and I'll go ahead and push that out to share with you just as an example. So you can download that. It's also in our resources. But it lays out sort of the agenda that was used for each of these focus groups and the process that we went through. They were typically 2 to 2.5 hours, and we covered the housekeeping rules, how to conduct the focus group, what the values were in the community related to that planning dimension, the current status of the economy or housing, depending on which dimension we were discussing. And then there was a brainstorming session with post-it notes and clustering of those, a prioritization, a solutions identification and measurement, and then identifying activities. The result of that, because we set up multiple focus groups, we had individuals from the community leading each of those focus groups, and literally every organization that was in the community participated in some shape or form in those groups. It was a really excellent way to engage everybody and build that community, that grassroots community support that's essential for future projects. And in most Alaska communities, there's huge needs. So literally the projects were numerous, and in this case they were identified in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So the end result from this process using these focus groups was to help to build that base, that foundation of support. If we go back to the concept of the bridge, that bedrock that's essential for supporting the pillars or the organizations that in turn support the project that we're working towards. So looking at our bridge concept, we've used different tools now to build that community support. We've got the bedrock in place, a strong foundation. We've got the arch that's being constructed. The pillars are coming up. So now what is the missing link to complete that span, to have your project mature into a long-term sustainable program? The missing link can be solid partnership agreements, MOAs or MOUs. So now what we want to do is we want to share a tool, one of many tools, that can be used to solidify your partnerships and bridge the gap from the community support to the political support. So before I go into MOAs and MOUs in depth, I want to preface this by saying that these MOAs and MOUs are they're good tools, but it takes that community support to sustain them. And I'm going to give another example later on, but I've been involved in an MOA that's lasted 17 years and witnessed its changes and see it evolve through the process. And I know that there were periods when the MOA, even though it was standing, because there at times wasn't that community support, the MOA really wasn't all that meaningful. So that's just critical to have that support. So an MOA and an MOU, basically, if you're wondering what the difference is, there really isn't a whole lot of difference. The terms are interchangeable. And MOAs and MOUs are often used as a statement of cooperation or understanding about a specific or general topic between two or more parties. They are an agreement used to clarify the roles and responsibilities of each party in a shared situation of interest. So some tips in negotiating or putting together your MOAs and MOUs. Because it contains the word agreement and a contract is an agreement, some people believe that an MOA signifies a more significant commitment than an MOU. If you're having difficulty entering a partnership using an MOA, then see if your potential partner wants to use an MOU. Some other tips: should your MOA or MOU be general or specific? Well, some advantages of being general is that you can use a general MOA or MOU for many different projects. So you can develop a basic MOA or MOU that lays out the framework for how two partners are going to collaborate, and then develop more specific MOUs for specific projects. The disadvantages of being general is that you may not get cooperation on those specific projects, and the roles may not be defined clearly enough, and the parties may not sign it as it makes them commit to certain unknowns. Some of the advantages of being specific is that it provides both parties the opportunity to decide whether they want to cooperate on projects on a case-by-case basis, and the disadvantages is that there's less flexibility. So in my work negotiating MOAs and MOUs, whether it's long, whether it's detailed or not, again, it falls back on the relationship between the two parties. The MOA or MOU is just an expression of that relationship, but practically, in practical terms, if the two partners aren't actively working together, then the MOA or MOU doesn't amount to a whole lot. Some of the typical elements of an MOA or an MOU include a clear mission statement, a main body, which would include your purpose statement, identify the scope, assign responsibilities, outline the terms of understanding, of course the signatories, signature lines, and then usually you would have a clause for reviewing that agreement once a year, for example, and you'd have a time frame. So a lot of the MOAs and MOUs that I've seen are usually short-term. That doesn't have to be the case. If it's just a general framework MOA or MOU, it could be longer term. In a lot of my work, I've done both program MOAs and MOUs, but also facility and infrastructure MOAs and MOUs. And those MOAs are slightly different. There's a few things that you really need to address, and I'm just going to highlight a few of those. For projects where you're trying to bring together multiple funders on one facility, you really have to clearly identify who's going to own that facility, what the long-term strategy is for maintaining and operating that, and how the costs of that are going to be shared. And the duration of the agreement, especially if you've got commitments for cost sharing for O&M, should be as long as the useful life of the facility. The beauty of MOAs and MOUs is that you can use these as tools to coordinate funding for projects, even if they're from multiple entities. If you clarify who's going to administer those funds and how the flow of those funds are going to go and how the reporting is going to work, so that the legal grantees can satisfy their reporting requirements. You can accomplish anything through these MOAs and MOUs. And in fact, on a lot of my projects, we've had literally, cities, tribes, other nonprofits contributing towards a single project, and it was the MOA that laid it out and made that possible, as well as the community support and the political support. Why are these agreements used? They're used to maximize available funds, to limit duplication of efforts, and to coordinate efforts to avoid redundancies, to establish partnerships, to define roles and responsibilities, clarify who's doing what, and bridge different types of partners. So those are just a few examples. So what I'm going to do is I have a template. There's a couple templates in our public folder that we shared with everybody in our email this morning. I can provide the link again at the end of this. I'm going to just go into one of these, the Tribal History and Culture Project Sample. I'll go ahead and push that one out. This is a really nice template that you can use to start your own MOA. And I'll go through the sections of it briefly. So in the Tribal History and Culture Project MOA template that I pushed out, the first part is the preamble, and this is kind of the warm and fuzzy. It's the mission. It's why we need to come together. It's what we're trying to achieve at a high level, and of course it identifies the parties involved. So that's the preamble. And then typically you would have some clauses that would address the intent or purpose a little more clearly defined, and the scope. What specifically is this MOA covering? If it's for a specific area, like in this case the relationship between the tribe and the school district to coordinate development of curriculum, then you would state that here. And the date and term. The next typical element that you'd find in the main body of your MOA is the mutual responsibility. So these are things that both parties mutually are responsible for doing. Working cooperatively to ensure appropriate, efficient communication, sharing information, scheduling joint meetings. And I can tell you from my own experience that the frequency of those meetings is really important. I mentioned that I was involved in an MOA that's 17 years old, and I've seen during that relationship where at times the meetings were monthly, and when the meetings were only once or twice a year, and you can see the dramatic difference in terms of the relationship when the meetings are infrequent. Next, in this case, you would have the one party's responsibilities, and in this example, the school district's responsibilities laid out. And the one that I want to point out down below is, especially on like an A&A project, you want to quantify if they're going to provide any in-kind or cash contributions for your project. And if this is something like for operations and maintenance, you're going to want to clarify how long they're making that commitment for. If it's a one-time deal, or if it's going to be annually for 10 years, or so on. So, and then we have the other party's responsibilities laid out as well. And lastly, the signature lines. So, as I mentioned before, your MOA can be short and sweet or more lengthy. And it just depends on what it is that you're collaborating on. So if you look at some examples of MOAs and MOUs throughout Indian country, you'll find a lot of different cases. If you just Google search tribal MOA, you'll find ones between federal agencies and tribes. There's some very interesting examples between cities and counties and tribes. For instance, the Lummi Nation and Whatcom County and the city of Bellingham have an MOA that deals with how they're managing the watershed jointly. The Swinomish Indian Tribal Community and Skagit County implemented an MOA to coordinate a land use program. I've got an example in our resources of the village of Kasan and the school that dealt with how they were going to house an EPA coordinator and provide environmental training and work with the school to do that. And then more recently, we're seeing a lot more so-called mutual aid agreements, and this is more in the emergency management side of things, where tribes, because of actually compared in some cases where they have more resources in the local city, are providing fire protection. And we see this in we saw this in California after some of the fires there in 2005, where some of the tribes in Southern California developed their emergency management capabilities, and then because there was no city or county capacity or capabilities, the tribe actually set up a mutual aid agreement and provided those. The one that I've been involved with for quite some time is the native village of Quinhagak and the city of Quinhagak, and in that example, that agreement has lasted 17 years. It's been renegotiated about every 2 years, and it literally, in the beginning, merged the city and the tribe's operations so that all of the city and state funding was funneled from the city to the tribe, and there was a joint council that was merged as a result of that to coordinate the village services, municipal projects, infrastructure, water, sewer. So literally every development in the community over the last 10 years was the result of contributions from both the city and the tribe, coordinated through the MOA between the two entities. It was a very, very powerful tool for the community. And I mentioned it's gone through different iterations and it's evolved. So currently, it's now a framework for the two entities to collaborate, but they're leaning more towards project-specific agreements now to tackle just individual projects. And the MOA, as it currently stands, is just a coordination tool to spell out who's doing what in the community. So to wrap up this example of a tool, we talked in the beginning about some of the community tools to build community sustainability, to build that grassroots support, the bedrock of the bridge, the pillars, to support the pillars. And then we gave an example of a tool, the MOAs and MOUs, at the political level, where that community support lobbied or basically worked and got their leadership to sign on to some of these agreements because there was local buy-in. And the focus groups were an example of how that local buy-in was developed or built. It's not the only way to do that, but it's a good way to engage people in the community and ensure everybody's had a voice in the project, with the long-term goal of bridging that span, of making that project become a long-term program and making it something beautiful. So now we have an actual case study, and I'm going to let Angela introduce the project. So Angela, can you take it from here?
Great. We have a woman from Alaska, and she was with the New Young Leaders program. Her name is Sarah. She is the administrative director of this project that was funded by an ANA SED grant. Sarah received her BA in Anthropology from Southern Oregon University and has been with Sealaska Heritage Institute since 2006. She is Tlingit, originally from Klawock, Alaska, a rural community located on Prince of Wales Island in southeast. During her tenure with Sealaska Heritage Institute, she has assisted in coordinating and implementing youth educational and cultural activities. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Dibdall. My Tlingit name is Unshawatki. Like Angela said, I'm originally from Klawock, Alaska. I work for Sealaska Heritage Institute, a regional nonprofit that is located in Juneau, Alaska. Our mission is to preserve, perpetuate the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian cultures of Southeast Alaska. And today I'm fortunate to have this opportunity to present on our Yishadi Nakhtiyan New Young Leaders project that I'm fortunate to be the project director of. A large component of our mission is the success and education of our youth. And what I kind of wanted to briefly touch on before I talk about the details of the project was the vision. And the vision for this project was to create our next generation of leaders. And by doing so, creating regional cohorts, establishing relationships with our youth. Often we hear from our leaders now, a component that has brought them together was their time at boarding school. And historically we hear that we hear the negative of those experiences. But one thing that was shared with us, that a lot of their relationships were formed early on in their younger formative years in high school through this experience. And so we want to create relationships with our youth throughout the region, and that's one of our vision for this project. We also want to instill pride and strengthen their identity. Our project is for both rural and urban students, and we find that bringing these students together, they balance each other out. And by doing so, they balance each other culturally, but also academically. One of our esteemed elders who has gone before us and walked into the forest was Dr. Walter Sobolov. And he instilled in us, not only through our organization and through his words, but through his actions, was the importance of being lifelong learners. And something that we've seen of individuals in the communities that are very successful is that they have that same mentality. And so we want our generations coming up to have the same mentality and work ethic, and to be engaged, to instill the concept that it is not too early for them to be active community members and providing assistance in their community. We want to ensure that our projects have instructors that are from our local communities, that are connected, and can provide the leadership. So the Yishadi Nakhtiyan project, the New Young Leaders project, has three major components to it. And the first being leadership academies. We actually just held our year one leadership academy at the University of Southeast Alaska. And it was very successful. We had approximately 50 students participate from throughout the region. Next, this coming year, we'll hold our regional leadership academies in rural communities. And again, it's showing that balance of both urban and rural life. And we have found that our students that come from our rural communities are very grounded culturally, and they almost become teachers to those students that may not have been fortunate to learn that knowledge and experience what it's like to live so closely to our ways of life. And then the third year, we'll bring them back together and strongly incorporate both the components of university life and urban, the advantages of being urban, but also mix in the rural and cultural activities. We are in the process of creating the Youth Leadership Council, and this will consist of students that are from the original cohort, and they'll help guide us in forming our curriculum, but also we will provide them leadership opportunities throughout the year. And at the end of the project, the goal is to develop an action plan that they will present to the legislature. And this year, to get the kids engaged and in thinking about it, we started by asking the question, what does team, which means strength, and Tlingit mean to you? And so at the Year 1 Academy, the kids started thinking about what that meant to them in their community, so they could go back and start having conversations with their elders, with their aunties, with local community leaders, so we could come together and start forming a plan that they will be the drivers on. And then the other component is an education advisory committee. Through this project, we've been able to work with our contacts and those that we have established relationships with throughout the region to provide guidance to our staff in developing and ensuring that this project is successful, but also that we're able to sustain it and continue it in our communities. So I briefly touched on already Year 1, the Leadership Academy. We had approximately 50 Alaska Native students participate. And the areas of instruction that we covered were public speaking. And to get our kids engaged, we actually used spoken word and poetry, and it was so successful. We try to incorporate activities that our kids will engage in and participate in without them quite realizing that while we were doing this, they were learning about getting up in front of a room and speaking to their peers, and it was very successful. We actually were able to capture the whole. At the end, we had a contest, and we were able to capture the students providing their poetry and their speeches about their communities. We focused on the community project and volunteering. The students throughout the year will be working with our staff to gear up for Year 2 and the projects that we're doing. Some of the ideas that the students threw out were doing community smokehouses or a community garden. Another student had the idea of doing a community cleanup and having that become an annual thing. We had Alaska Native language in Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian. And we find that this is so important. One thing that really stood out and has stood out in our education programs is that we find that our students excel much more greatly when they are connected and have a strong understanding of who they are and where they come from. And so we always try to incorporate culture and language into our programs. Life skills, we did that, and we split the kids up amongst upperclassmen and lowerclassmen, and it was to start preparing them for college and success in high school, and then Northwest Coast Art also. So the sustainability of this project that we have found has been successful is that we've been able to engage with experienced and educated staff and instructors that are connected to our way of life and communities. We've actually found this to be very imperative to the success of this program, is having individuals that are in the communities that have a good sense of our youth and the needs of our youth, and then having them participate in the program to be role models and instructors in guiding us. We have formal agreements with organizations. Sealaska Heritage Institute works with Sealaska Corporation, our regional corporation, and in doing so, through Sealaska, we were able to obtain 2 interns to assist us this summer. The University of Southeast Alaska and the Juneau School District, we have a formal MOU with them, and we have found this to be very important to the success of our program and ensuring that 2 of our largest partners are at the table in helping us in the success of this program. And then I guess the last point that I wanted to make was in creating these relationships with the community members is that our goal is to have these be community-based programs and to encourage local ownership and volunteerism. And that's it on our program. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We really appreciate you sharing your project with us and all of those MOUs and MOAs that you have in place and the relationships that you are building in the various communities. So we'd like all of you to take a moment to think about the information that has been presented today and type something in the chat box that is a takeaway that you are going to leave with today, something that you may remember, something that you may use in your next project. And if you would prefer to keep this anonymously, you can share those thoughts in an evaluation, which we will be sharing momentarily. And the chat box is in the lower left corner. Okay, well, I hope that you're all thinking of something that is going to be useful for you and you have found things that will be useful to you that you will take away. Oh, there's a couple. The idea of using elders more concretely as well as involving the actual participants more in the planning as a method of ensuring success. That's wonderful. Again, that is part of the community, right? The participants, sometimes we forget that they are part of the community. And I really like the reinforced emphasis on community engagement and buy-in. And MOA, MOU is a great way to do that. Thanks. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing those with us. And we're always happy when there's warm fuzzies that folks get to take away. So we will be having some resources for you. Anthony, you want to tell them a little bit about that?
Sure. Okay, we put together a few resources for you. One of the most helpful ones is really if you go to the ANA national website to the resource directory and type in sustainability, you'll get a whole range of resources for you. The past sustainability webinars, the different sustainability tools. If you look at the ANA nonprofit toolkit, there's a template in there for doing your own strategic plan, community planning. That can be really helpful. And then there's also the ANA resource directory, which includes profiles of different funders and partner organizations. And of course, your regional training and technical assistance providers are a huge resource for you that can help navigate some of these resources, provide technical assistance to you, provide project development, ETA, and pre-app ETA, and of course our workshops and training that we provide. So that's just a sample of some of the resources that are available for you. Angela?
Thank you. And as Anthony mentioned, that document is being shared with you. He typed a link into the chat box that you can all access, and he is pushing out a PDF that you can view and save now as well. All you have to do is click Save. It will save to directly to your computer. This is our contact information as well as some contact information for all of the other regional TTA centers, since many of you come from various places. You can contact the center most near you. And at this time, we are going to put out an evaluation that you can literally fill out right here before you leave the room, as well as we will put the link in the chat box in the event you're having some technical difficulties with the actual form on your page. And at this time, we are starting to run out of time, but if there were a few questions that you wanted to type in the chat box, we're happy to take those. And Deborah, early on you were asking how the new Young Leaders Program was sustained and their plan for sustainability. I wanted to make sure that you got your questions answered as Sarah was speaking. So if you could raise your hand, which is up near right under your name in the participant. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much. And if there are other questions, please feel free to type those again in the chat box, and we will spend a few moments answering them. And in the meantime, before you leave, we would ask that you would fill out the evaluation form. We hope that you all enjoyed the presentation today. We are very thankful, Shara, that you were here. And we thank all of you for coming.
Angela, I wanted to share one last tip on MOAs. And this is going back to the MOA between the city and the tribe. Believe it or not, in some cases, we can be victims of our own success. And when you have a long-standing relationship between multiple parties, it's really critical to not only maintain the constant communication, but when you achieve things, you need to also acknowledge the contributions of everybody that's participated equally and fairly. So that's just a tidbit of advice.
Great. Well, again, we hope that you'll take a few moments to fill out the evaluation form, and then as you leave the room, select File up in the upper left-hand corner, and then Exit from the drop-down menu. I hope you all have a great day.